Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku's quirk was replaced with advanced nanotech? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Some men are not created equal. Izuku Midoriya learned this life-altering, soul-crushing lesson at the tender age of 4, in a sterile white room that smelled of antiseptic and shattered dreams. The doctor, a portly man with goggles that magnified his unsympathetic eyes, swiveled in his chair, tapping a pen against an X-ray of Izuku's left foot. "You should probably give it up," he said, his tone devoid of any bedside manner. He pointed to a specific joint with the tip of his pen. "You see, by this age, a child should have only one joint in their pinky toe. It's a vestigial remnant of our pre-quirk evolution. Your son, Mrs. Midoriya, he has 2 joints. It's a clear indicator. He's part of the 20% of the population born without a quirk." The silence that followed was heavier than any physical weight. Inko Midoriya, her hands trembling, could only manage a soft, heartbroken "Oh." Izuku himself didn't understand all the words, but he understood the finality in the doctor's voice. He understood the pity in the man's gaze. He understood the trembling of his mother's hand as she held his. His own small hand was clenched around the cool, smooth metal of the locket hanging from a thin chain around his neck. It was a simple, silver-colored oval, unadorned and perfectly polished. His mother had given it to him on his 4th birthday, just a week ago. "It was from your father, Izuku," she had said, her smile tinged with a familiar sadness whenever she spoke of him. "He wanted you to have it. He said it was a piece of his legacy." Hisashi Midoriya was an enigma, a ghost in their small apartment. He was a brilliant, reclusive engineer, Inko explained, working on a revolutionary project overseas. The calls were infrequent, the letters even more so. The locket was the last thing he had sent before his communications had ceased entirely for a critical, long-term phase of his work. For Izuku, the locket was his father. It was a tangible link to the man he only knew from a single, slightly faded photograph on the mantel. The drive home from the doctor's office was a blur of muted colors and stifling silence. The locket felt cold against his chest, a stark contrast to the burning shame welling up behind his eyes. That night, the familiar glow of the computer screen did little to comfort him. The video was already queued up, the one he'd watched 1,000 times. The debut of All Might. Disaster footage, shaky and chaotic. Then, a booming laugh that cut through the fear. "Have no fear!" "Why?" "Because I am here." All Might, carrying a dozen people on his back, his smile a beacon of absolute certainty. That was what Izuku wanted to be. A hero who saved everyone with a smile. A hero like All Might. He turned in his chair, his small body trembling, pointing a finger at the screen. Tears he'd been holding back all day finally streamed down his face. "Mom!" he choked out, his voice a pathetic squeak. Can I be a hero too?" His mother rushed to him, her own face a mask of anguish. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a tight, desperate hug. Izuku waited for the reassurance, the "of course you can," that he so desperately needed to hear. It never came. Instead, she buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. "I'm sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry!" The words echoed the doctor's verdict. It was in that moment, held in his mother's arms, that Izuku understood. His dream wasn't just difficult, it was impossible. The locket, pressed between their bodies, felt impossibly heavy. 10 years passed. 10 years of whispers, of pitying looks of scorn. The label, quirkless, became his shadow, a brand seared into his identity. The world was one of vibrant, chaotic, awe-inspiring powers, and he was a black and white photograph in a technicolor age. The primary source of his daily torment was, ironically, the person he had once called his best friend. Katsuki Bakugo. Kaken, whose explosive quirk was as volatile as his personality. What was once a childhood rivalry soured into a relentless campaign of bullying. Izuku's analytical nature, his incessant mumbling and scribbling in his hero analysis for the future notebooks, was seen not as a strength, but as the pathetic coping mechanism of a powerless wannabe. "Still think you can be a hero, Deku?" Bakugo would snarl, sparks crackling in his palms. "You're less than a side character." You're a pebble on the side of the road, Deku. Useless. That was his name now. Through it all, the locket remained. He never took it off. It was a constant, cool pressure against his sternum. Sometimes, during the worst of Bakugo's tirades, he would discreetly press his thumb against its smooth surface, grounding himself. It was a piece of a father he couldn't remember, a legacy he couldn't understand, and in a world that had deemed him worthless, it was the only thing that was uniquely his. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon in his final year of middle school, the trajectory of his life was violently, irrevocably altered. It began with a roar and the disgusting, cloying scent of sewage. An amorphous blob of green sludge erupted from a manhole cover, two manic, floating eyes fixing on him. A villain. Here, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. The sludge gurgled, its voice like mud bubbling. Before Izuku could even scream, the viscous fluid engulfed him, forcing its way down his throat, into his nostrils. He clawed at the mass, his fingers sinking into the filth with no purchase. His lungs burned, black spots dancing in his vision. This is it. I'm dying. Is this how it ends? Then, a thunderous clang. The manhole cover, sent flying by an unseen force, ricocheted off the underpass wall. Texas smash! A hurricane of wind pressure tore the sludge villain apart, scattering the green slime across the concrete. Izuku fell to the ground, gasping, coughing, his body trembling uncontrollably as he stared up at the impossible silhouette filling the tunnel entrance. Blonde hair shaped like rabbit ears, a smile that could calm a tidal wave. All Might. The rest was a surreal dream. All Might collected the villain in a soda bottle. He signed Izuku's notebook, and then, in a moment of sheer, idiotic desperation, Izuku clung to the hero's leg as he leaped into the sky. It led them to a rooftop, the wind whipping around them, the city sprawling below. It was here, with his heart hammering against his ribs, that Izuku asked the question that had defined his entire existence. Even without a quirk, can I be a hero? All Might's form began to steam. His smile faltered. Izuku watched, horrified, as the mountain of muscle deflated like a punctured balloon, replaced by a skeletal, emaciated man with hollow eyes and blood trickling from his mouth. This was the real All Might. A man grievously injured, living on borrowed time. He explained his wound, the limits of his power, the reality of the world Izuku wanted to join. His words were not cruel, but they were a hammer blow to Izuku's fragile hope. Pros are always risking their lives, the hero said, his voice a low rasp. I cannot simply say, you can be a hero even without power. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic, kid, the words echoed the doctor's. Give it up. The door to the rooftop stairwell clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone with the wind and the crushing weight of his idol's final verdict. He stood there for a long time, numb, his hand gripping the cold, unfeeling locket around his neck. It offered no comfort. It was just a piece of metal, a hollow promise from a father who wasn't there. He trudged down the stairs and back onto the street, his mind a hollow void. He was on autopilot, his feet carrying him home while his spirit remained shattered on that rooftop. He didn't notice the gathering crowd or the distant sound of explosions until he was right in front of them, the familiar sound of Bakugo's quirk. Pop, pop, crackle, boom! He pushed through the onlookers. There, in the narrow alleyway, was the very same sludge villain All Might had captured. It must have fallen from his pocket during their flight, and trapped within its suffocating embrace, explosions firing off uselessly, was Kaken. Bakugo's eyes, usually so full of arrogant fire, were wide with terror. He was drowning. He was going to die. The pro-heroes at the scene were useless. Death Arms couldn't get a solid grip. Kamui Woods was helpless against a villain with no solid form and in an area on fire. Backdraft was busy containing the flames. They were waiting for someone with their right quirk. Izuku watched, frozen. He saw Bakugo's desperate, pleading eyes meet his, and then, his body moved. He wasn't thinking. He didn't have a plan. His legs, which had felt like lead moments before, were a blur of motion. He sprinted past the police line, past the stunned heroes, straight towards the monster. Kid! No! Stop! The shouts were background noise. All he could see was Bakugo's face. All he could feel was a primal, desperate urge to do something. He swung his bright yellow backpack off his shoulder and hurled it at the villain's face. A textbook struck one of the creature's eyes, causing it to flinch in surprise. It was a pathetic, useless gesture. But it bought a second. A single, precious second. He reached the villain, his hands clawing at the sludge, trying to free Bakugo's mouth and nose. "Kaken, what the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo choked out between explosions. "I don't know," Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face. "My legs just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." The villain, recovered from its shock, snarled. Its momentary distraction turned to rage. "You again! I'll kill you both!" A massive tendril of sludge, far larger and faster than before, lashed out. It wasn't aiming for Bakugo. It was aiming for Izuku. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an eternity. He could see the individual ripples in the green slime as it hurtled towards his face. He saw the horrified expressions on the heroes' faces. This was it. The price for his reckless, foolish heroism. An electric surge, hot and violent, shot through his body. It felt like a lightning strike, originating from the center of his chest and branching out through every nerve. The locket against his skin suddenly blazed with an intense, searing heat, as if it had been plunged into a furnace. A high-frequency whine, just on the edge of hearing, screamed in his ears. His vision swam with a cascade of blue-white light, adrenaline, terror, desperation. A biological cocktail of pure, unfiltered survival instinct. It was the trigger. Instinctively, Izuku threw his left arm up to shield his face. The world erupted in a flash of cerulean light. Shinin, from the back of his forearm, a structure of impossible geometry burst into existence. It wasn't flesh or bone. It was a shimmering, semi-transparent barrier, roughly the size of a dinner plate, composed of interlocking, pulsating hexagons of light. It looked like a fragment of a digital honeycomb, glowing with an internal, silvery blue energy. The sludge tentacles slammed into the strange shield. Crack thwump! The sound was alien, a fusion of shattering glass and the dull thud of impacted metal. The hexagonal shield held for a fraction of a second, the point of impact flaring brilliantly. Then, with a sound like 1,000 tiny chimes, it shattered, dissolving into a shower of harmless, fading light particles. But it had done its job. The blow, which would have snapped his neck, was deflected. The force still threw him backward, making him stumble, but he was alive. He stared at his arm, which was now screaming in agony. It wasn't the pain of impact. It was a deep, searing ache in his muscles and bones, as if he had just tried to lift a car. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over him, so intense it made his knees buckle. He didn't understand. Nobody did. Bakugo stared, his terrified eyes wide with confusion. The heroes, the crowd, everyone saw the impossible flicker of light, the strange shield that had appeared and vanished in the blink of an eye. What was that? Death Arms muttered. The villain, enraged by the defiance, loomed over Izuku. "A little light show won't save you!" But the boy's reckless courage, and the inexplicable phenomenon that followed, had shamed the number one hero into action. "I really am pathetic," a familiar voice boomed. All Might, back in his hero form, stood between the villain and the boys. He was bleeding from the mouth, his body pushed past its limit. "I preached the tenets of heroism, but I failed to live by them." With a mighty roar, he grabbed the boys, anchoring his feet. Detroit. Smash! The punch was so powerful it didn't even need to connect. The sheer force of the wind pressure it generated was enough to blast the sludge villain into smithereens. The sky, which had been clear moments before, clouded over. Droplets of rain, mixed with green slime, began to fall. The aftermath was a chaotic scene of reporters and paramedics. The pro-heroes admonished Izuku for his recklessness, while they praised Bakugo for his bravery and powerful quirk. Izuku didn't hear most of it. He was in a daze, his mind reeling, his arm throbbing with that strange, internal pain. He kept staring at his forearm, flexing his fingers, expecting something to happen. Nothing. He was walking home, the sun setting, when Bakugo caught up to him. "Deku!" he yelled. Izuku turned. "I didn't need you to save me. I had it handled." Don't think for a second I owe you anything, you quirkless reject. He turned and stomped away, his pride clearly wounded more than his body. Izuku could only offer a weak, tired smile. That was just Kaken's way. He was almost to his apartment when a second, more welcome voice called out, "I am here!" In a more casual form, All Might, back in his skeletal state, stepped out from a corner. "Young man," he began, a serious expression on his face. "I came to thank you, and to apologize. But first, I have to ask." He looked Izuku dead in the eye, his gaze intense. "On the rooftop, you told me you were quirkless. And I believe you were telling the truth. So please tell me. That shield. What was that?" Izuku's heart hammered. He looked down at his arm again. I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was going to die. My whole body felt like it was on fire, especially the locket my dad gave me. It got really hot. Then I put my arm up, and it just happened. It hurt. A lot." He looked up at his idol, his eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated confusion. "I've never done anything like that before. I swear." All Might stared at him for a long, silent moment. He saw no deceit in the boy's eyes, only bewilderment and exhaustion. He had seen it before, on rare occasions. Quirks, especially powerful or unusual ones, sometimes lay dormant, only to manifest explosively under conditions of extreme stress or life-threatening danger. A latent quirk. The boy had the spirit of a true hero. He had moved without thinking, risking his life for another when all the pros, including himself, had stood by and hesitated. And now, it seemed, he had the power to match that spirit. A defensive power, perhaps? Something unique. All Might's original plan, to pass on his own sacred torch, one for all, evaporated. Why would he give his power to someone who clearly possessed a potent, nascent quirk of their own? This boy didn't need a borrowed power. He needed to discover his own. A wide, genuine smile spread across Tashinori Yagi's face. It was the first time Izuku had seen him smile in this form, and it was more reassuring than the hero's booming stage version. "Kid," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "You know, all the great heroes have a story about their origins. A moment where their bodies moved before they could think. And today, that was your story." Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. "You can become a hero," All Might declared, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. The words Izuku had longed to hear his entire life washed over him, a dam of 10 years of despair breaking within him. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing. All Might let him have his moment before continuing. "You have the heart. And it seems you have the power as well. It's raw, uncontrolled, but it is undeniably there. The road will be difficult. You must learn what that power is. You must train it, tame it, and make it your own. It will demand more of you than you can possibly imagine." He pointed a long, bony finger at Izuku. "Train your body. Train your mind. Hone that power. The UA High Entrance exam is in 10 months. I expect to see you there." With that, he gave a nod and walked away, leaving Izuku on his knees on the sidewalk, the world remade. He wasn't Deku the Quirkless. He was Izuku Midoriya, a boy with a quirk, a boy who had been told by the #1 hero himself that he could achieve his dream. Later that night, after a tearful reunion with his mother and a dinner he barely tasted, Izuku sat in his All Might-themed bedroom. His body ached, a deep, pervasive fatigue that felt different from simple physical exertion. His arms still had a faint, residual thrumming sensation, like the ghost of a powerful vibration. His mind was a whirlwind. A quirk. He had a quirk. All this time, it was just sleeping? What triggered it? Was it the danger? The adrenaline? He tried to summon the shield again, closing his eyes, focusing, even slapping his arm lightly. Nothing. His gaze fell upon the locket, which he had placed on his desk. It looked the same as always, simple, silver-colored, polished. But when he had been in the villain's grasp, he was sure it had burned with heat. He picked it up. It was cool to the touch now. He ran his thumb over its smooth surface, a habit ingrained over a decade. This time, however, his thumb caught on something, a seam. A hairline fracture in the otherwise perfect surface, so thin it was practically invisible. He had never noticed it before. Had it appeared today? Driven by a sudden curiosity, he pressed his thumbnail into the tiny groove and pushed. The locket didn't open. Instead, with a soft click, a minuscule panel, no larger than a pinhead, slid aside on its surface, revealing a dark recess. From it, a needle, impossibly fine and sharp, pricked the tip of his thumb. "Ow!" he yelped, dropping the locket. A tiny bead of blood welled up on his thumb. He looked back at the locket on his desk. The drop of his blood that had been on the needle was being absorbed into the metal, vanishing as if into a sponge. Then, the locket began to glow. It was a soft, pulsating blue light, casting strange shadows across his room. It floated an inch above his desk, held aloft by some unseen force. Izuku stared, mesmerized and terrified. A beam of light, thin as a thread, shot out from the locket and hit him squarely between the eyes. It didn't hurt. It felt like information, and then his world overloaded. A translucent blue overlay materialized in his field of vision. It was a heads-up display, like something from a science fiction movie. Lines of text and incomprehensible symbols scrolled rapidly in the periphery of his sight. In the top left corner, a window showed his own heartbeat, respiration, and body temperature. Biometrics stable. Adrenaline levels elevated. Energy reserves 2.1%. Warning: critical energy depletion. Recharge recommended. In the center of his vision, a larger window opened. DNA signature confirmed. Izuku Midoriya. System status: dormant awaiting initialization. Activation trigger: extreme biological stress complete. Initializing Archimedes System V. 7.2. Archimedes System? What is happening? A new window replaced the initialization text. It was a video feed. A face flickered into view, a man with tired, intelligent eyes, unruly dark green hair so much like his own, and a dusting of freckles across his nose. Izuku recognized him instantly from the photograph on the mantel. It was his father, Hisashi Midoriya. He looked exhausted, worried, and much older than in the photo. The background was a stark, metallic laboratory. A pre-recorded message. Izuku. Hisashi's voice was a low, urgent whisper, laced with an accent Izuku couldn't place. It was filled with a regret so profound it seemed to reach across time and space. "My son, if you are seeing this, it means two things. First, the Archimedes system has activated. And second, it means I am likely gone." Izuku's breath hitched in his throat. His world, which had already been turned upside down, shattered and reassembled itself into a shape he could no longer recognize. He was not quirkless, but what he had was not a quirk. It was a legacy. A dangerous, impossible, and terrifying legacy. And it was just beginning. The face in the hologram was both achingly familiar and a complete stranger. It was the face from the photograph, the one Izuku had stared at for countless hours, trying to divine a personality from a static image. But here in motion, it was real. The slight furrow of his brow, the way his eyes darted to the side as if checking for unseen listeners, the deep, tired lines etched around his mouth. It was the face of a man carrying an impossible burden. It was the face of his father. "Izuku." Hisashi's recorded voice was a low, urgent whisper, a ghost in the machine speaking directly into his son's soul. "My son, if you are seeing this, it means two things. First, the Archimedes system has activated. And second, it means I am likely gone." The words hit Izuku like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Gone? He had spent his entire life crafting a narrative of a busy, important father working on a secret project overseas, a father who would one day return. The cold finality in Hisashi's tone shattered that fragile hope in an instant. Izuku reached out a trembling hand, his fingers passing through the holographic image as if it were smoke. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where are you? What happened? Why did you leave? But there was only the recording, a one-way message from the past. I have so much to explain, and so little time. Hisashi continued, his gaze fixed forward, as if he could see his son across the years. What you experienced today, that shield, it was not a quirk. Not in the biological sense. The doctor was right, Izuku. You were born without the quirk factor. I am so sorry for the pain that must have caused you. A fresh wave of confusion washed over Izuku. The doctor was right? But All Might, the shield. What you have? Hisashi said, leaning closer to the recording device, his eyes burning with intensity. Is my life's work. My legacy. I called it the Archimedes system. It is a colony of biointegrated, self-replicating nanomachines, bonded to your DNA. They are passed down genetically, designed to lie dormant until the host organism undergoes a moment of extreme, life-threatening biological stress. A flood of adrenaline and cortisol is the key that awakens them. Hisashi gestured vaguely at the complex machinery behind him. Think of them, Izuku, as the smallest, most intelligent construction workers in the world. Their core programming is simple: deconstruct, analyze, and reconstruct matter at the atomic level. They are a part of you, living in your bloodstream, networked through your nervous system. That HUD you're seeing? That's their way of communicating with your brain, translating their data into something you can understand. The pieces began to click into place with dizzying speed. The burning heat from the locket, that was the activation pulse, jump-started by the blood sample. The sudden, debilitating exhaustion, the system had used his own body's energy as fuel. The shield wasn't a product of his biology. It was a product of engineering. Your mother! Hisashi's expression softened, a flicker of deep affection crossing his tired features. I told her it was a latent, hereditary quirk that ran in my family. It was a lie, Izuku, but it was a lie to protect you both. The truth is far more dangerous. The Archimedes system is a technology far beyond anything this world is supposed to have for at least another century, and because of that, it will draw unwanted attention. There are people, organizations, who would do anything to possess this power. They will see you not as a person, but as a prize to be captured, a weapon to be controlled. The warning hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Izuku's bedroom, his safe haven filled with All Might memorabilia, suddenly felt exposed, fragile. But the system is also a gift. Hisashi's voice regained its firmness. It is a tool, and its effectiveness is limited only by the user's knowledge and imagination. To control it, you must understand the world around you. Physics, chemistry, engineering, biology. The more you learn, the more powerful you will become. Your mind, Izuku, is the true master control program. He paused, taking a ragged breath. A distant alarm began to chime softly in the background of the recording. The system operates on two core resources, he explained, speaking faster now. Energy and matter. The energy is drawn directly from your own bioelectricity. The more complex the task, the more it will drain you. Pushing yourself too far could lead to cellular damage, coma, or even death. You must build up your physical stamina, your body's capacity to generate and store energy. It is your power source. Izuku instinctively glanced at the energy meter on his HUD. 2.1%. The warning about critical depletion suddenly felt far more terrifying. The second resource is matter. Hisashi continued, the alarm in the background growing louder. The nanites need raw materials to build with. They can harvest it from the air, dust, carbon, trace metals, but for larger constructs, they will need a denser source. Scrap metal, stone, anything. They can break it down and rebuild it into whatever you can design. The video feed flickered. Static washed across Hisashi's face. I don't have much time, he said, his voice strained. The sounds of shouting could now be heard in the distance. The locket is more than just the activator. It's the master key, the core processor. Never lose it. It contains all the base programming and this message. My only way of speaking to you. Hisashi's eyes, for the first time, seemed to lose their focus on the recording and filled with a raw, paternal love. The scientist was gone, and only a father remained. Izuku, I am sorry. I'm so sorry I burdened you with this. I never wanted this life for you. I wanted you to be safe. But I was left with no choice. I had to ensure the Archimedes system was in the hands of someone good, someone with a pure heart. I had to give it to you. The video flickered violently now. A loud crash echoed from his father's end. Be brave, my son. Be smart. And be better than me. Whatever you choose to do with this power. I am proud of you, Izuku. Never forget that. The hologram dissolved into a shower of blue static, and the locket, its light fading, clattered back onto the desk. The room was plunged back into its normal, dim light. The only thing that remained was the silent, persistent blue interface overlaid on his vision. Silence. Izuku sat there, frozen, for what felt like an hour. The words echoed in his head. Not a quirk. Nanomachines? Dangerous. Proud of you. He was a living, breathing science fiction experiment, a legacy of a father he had just met and lost in the span of 5 minutes. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. They weren't tears of sadness for his quirkless past, but tears of profound, earth-shattering confusion and a strange, aching grief for the father he never knew. Slowly, shakily, he stood up and walked to his full-length mirror. He stared at his reflection, a plain boy with a wild mess of green hair and wide, tear-filled eyes. But now, he could see the faint, shimmering blue text of his HUD superimposed over his own face. It was real. This was his new reality. He took a deep breath, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Grief could wait. Confusion could be sorted through. His father's last words were a directive: be smart. He had to understand. He had to learn. His eyes scanned the new interface. The biometric window was still there, his heart rate gradually slowing. The energy meter blinked a low-power warning, but below it, new command prompts had appeared, simple and elegant. Scan, construct, enhance, 3 core functions. His father had said his mind was the control program. Did that mean he just had to think it? He focused on the first command, scan, and looked at his favorite limited edition All Might figurine on his shelf, the Silver Age version. Scan the figurine, he thought, putting as much intent into the mental command as he could. The world seemed to shift. A faint blue grid overlaid itself on the figurine. The scan prompt in his vision glowed brighter, and a progress bar appeared and filled in less than a second. A new window opened up next to the figurine in his HUD, filled with data. Object: All Might action figure, Silver Age Ed. Mass: 212.6 grams. Composition analysis: polyvinyl chloride, PVC 88.4%. Acrylic polymer paint, 7.1%. Phthalate plasticizers, 4.2%. Trace elements PB, CD 0.3%. A complete, detailed chemical and physical breakdown. He could see a translucent, rotating wireframe model of the figurine in the window. He could zoom in, isolate parts, view stress points. It was more information than he could have ever gotten just by looking at it, or replaced his grief. He turned and scanned his desk, laminated particle board, steel alloy, iron screws, the wall of his room, gypsum, cellulose, latex paint, and then, with a deep breath, he looked at his own left hand. Scan. The process was different this time. It felt internal. A strange, tingling sensation, like faint static electricity, moved up his arm from his chest. The data window that opened was vastly more complex. Subject: Izuku Midoriya left hand, biological analysis, epidermis/dermis layer, subcutaneous tissue, musculoskeletal structure, 27 bones, associated ligaments, vascular system, radial/ulnar arteries, etc. Nervous system. Nanomachine colony density, 18.7%, optimal range. Note: trace cellular scarring detected in metacarpal muscle groups. Residual strain from unauthorized kinetic energy disbursement. Unauthorized kinetic energy disbursement, he whispered. The shield. It was talking about the shield. The system had a log. He was looking at a blueprint of himself, complete with diagnostic notes. It was invasive, terrifying, and absolutely incredible. Next was construct. This was the big one. This was what had saved him. His father said it required matter. He looked around his room. He didn't want to disassemble his All Might collection. The air. Hisashi had said they could harvest from the air. He looked at the sunbeams slanting through his window, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. Okay. Let's start simple. A sphere. Just a small, solid sphere. He focused on the command construct and held out his hand, palm up. He pictured a marble-sized sphere floating above it. The system responded instantly. A new window appeared in his HUD, a simple design interface showing a wireframe sphere. Below it were 2 resource meters. Energy cost, 0.8%. Matter required, 1.5 grams. Source, ambient airborne particulates. Proceed? Y/N. He thought, yes. The energy meter on his main HUD dropped from an already critical 2.1% to 1.3%. He felt a wave of dizziness, a sudden, draining fatigue that made his vision swim. At the same time, something extraordinary happened above his palm. The dust motes in the sunbeam ceased their random dance. They swirled together, drawn into a miniature vortex. He could hear a faint, high-frequency hum as the particles spiraled faster and faster, coalescing into a single point of grayish matter. The process took about 10 seconds. When the humming stopped, a small, lumpy sphere, the color of dark dust, clattered into his palm. It was surprisingly dense, warm to the touch, and had a rough, gritty texture. It was ugly, imperfect, but it was real. He had created something from literally thin air. He laughed, a giddy, slightly hysterical sound. He had just performed a miracle of science, and it felt like magic. He wanted to try again, to make something more complex, but the dizziness was getting worse. The warning, critical energy depletion message was now flashing an angry red. His father's warning about coma or death echoed in his mind. Okay. No more constructing for now. That left one more command, enhance. This one scared him. Scan was passive. Construct was external. Enhance, that was internal. That was the system actively messing with his body. He remembered the deep, searing pain in his arm after the shield had shattered. That had to be related. But his father had also said he needed to build up his body, his energy capacity. Perhaps this was part of it. He decided on a simple, controllable test. A push-up. He got down on the floor. His arms trembled slightly from the fatigue. He managed one, then a second, before his muscles screamed in protest. He collapsed onto the carpet, panting. Pathetic. Okay. Let's try this. He got back into position. He focused on the command, enhance, and specifically on the muscles in his arms and chest. Enhance my upper body strength. Just a little. A new interface appeared. It showed a medical diagram of his own torso and arms, with the major muscle groups highlighted. A slider bar appeared, labeled structural reinforcement, 0 to 100%. It was currently at 0. Cautiously, he mentally pushed the slider to 10%. The sensation was bizarre and deeply unsettling. It wasn't a sudden jolt of power. It was a low hum that started in his chest and spread through his shoulders and down his arms. He could feel a faint vibration in his bones. It felt like every muscle fiber was being subtly tightened, reinforced by an invisible, microscopic lattice. The energy meter began to drain, not in a chunk like the construct command, but as a slow, steady trickle. He tried another push-up. This time, it was effortless. He pushed up so easily his hands almost left the floor. He did another. And another. 10, 20, 30. He felt no strain, no burn. He felt powerful. A grin spread across his face. This was incredible. What were his limits? Could he be as strong as All Might? He got to his feet, feeling the power thrumming in his arms. He looked at his bed. It was a simple wooden frame with a mattress. Heavy, but not impossible to move. He decided to try and lift one corner. He focused on the enhance command again. Give me more. Push the slider to 50%. The HUD flashed a yellow warning. Caution, untrained biological host. Structural stress may exceed tissue tolerance. He ignored it. He was feeling too good, too powerful. 50%. The hum in his arms intensified to a painful buzz. The feeling of reinforcement was now a crushing pressure from within. He grabbed the corner of his bed frame and lifted. It came up off the floor with shocking ease. He lifted it higher, a full foot off the ground, a triumphant laugh bubbling in his chest. For a boy who had been scrawny and weak his entire life, this feeling was intoxicating. Let's try 70. The moment he had the thought, the system tried to respond. The slider on his HUD shot past 50. Red alerts flooded his vision. Warning! Warning! cascading muscle fiber tears detected, structural stress exceeding tolerance, emergency shutdown of enhancement, subroutine, the power vanished. It didn't fade, it snapped off like a severed cable, and then came the pain. It was 1,000 times worse than the backlash from the shield. A deep, agonizing, tearing agony erupted through his arms and chest. He screamed and dropped the bed, which crashed to the floor with a splintering thud. He collapsed, clutching his arms, his muscles spasming violently. It felt as if every fiber had been stretched to its breaking point, and then viciously snapped back. His energy meter plummeted to 0.1%. The world went gray at the edges. He lay on the floor, gasping, his body trembling, the ghost of his father's warning, cellular damage, coma, or even death, a screaming siren in his mind. It took him nearly an hour to recover enough to drag himself into his chair. His arms and chest throbbed with a deep, punishing ache. He had learned his lesson. This power was not a toy. It had rules, harsh and unforgiving ones. And he had just broken several of them. He reached for a fresh notebook, his hand shaking. It was one of many he kept for hero analysis. He opened it to the first page and, with a pained grimace, picked up a pen. He crossed out the title he had pre-written, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, and wrote a new one, Archimedes System User Manual, Volume 1. His handwriting was shaky, but his mind was clear, analytical. He began to write, distilling everything he had learned from his father's message and his own painful experiments into a set of fundamental rules. Rule 1. It is nanotechnology, not a quirk. My body is the hardware. My mind is the software. The locket is the core processor. The diagnosis was correct. I am technically quirkless. This must remain a secret. To the world, my quirk is construct. Rule 2. It requires 2 resources. A. Energy, my own stamina/bioelectricity. The meter on the HUD is a literal fuel gauge. If it hits 0, I could die. I must increase my stamina. Physical training isn't just for getting strong, it's for increasing my power capacity. B. Matter, raw materials for construction. Air works for small things, but it's slow and inefficient. Need denser materials for anything substantial. Rule 3. 3 core functions. A. Scan, information gathering. Safe to use. No significant energy cost. My greatest tactical advantage. Analyze everything. B. Construct, external creation. Energy cost is upfront and proportional to mass/complexity. Overuse leads to exhaustion and passing out. C. Enhance, internal reinforcement. A constant energy drain while active. Highly dangerous. My body has limits. Pushing past them causes severe physical damage, muscle tears, etc. Must be used carefully and in short bursts. The backlash is the limiter. He paused, rereading his own words. It was a terrifying, exhilarating list. His path to becoming a hero had just become infinitely more complex. He couldn't be like All Might, a hero who solved problems with a single, overwhelming punch. He lacked the raw, biological power. One for All was a nuclear reactor. The Archimedes system was a sophisticated, high-tech factory. It required a different kind of hero. He looked at the posters of smiling heroes on his wall. His dream hadn't changed, but the path to it had been completely redrawn. He needed to be strong, yes, to fuel the machine inside him. But more than that, he needed to be smart. He needed to be an engineer, a tactician, an analyst. His greatest weapon wasn't a nanite shield or a reinforced fist. It was the analytical mind that had once been the source of so much ridicule. The UA entrance exam was in 10 months. He now had a clear, if daunting, set of goals. Train his body to its absolute peak to expand his energy reserves. And train his mind, devour every book he could find on physics, engineering, materials science, and programming, to master the limitless potential of his legacy. He picked up the locket from his desk. It was cool and inert once more, a simple piece of metal. But now he knew the truth. It was not just a memento of the father he'd lost. It was the key to his future, a legacy of genius and danger, placed directly into his hands. The weight of it felt immense, but for the first time since that day in the doctor's office, it wasn't a burden. It was a purpose. The path of the Maker had begun. The morning after his disastrous experiment with the enhanced function was an agonizing symphony of pain. Every muscle in Izuku's upper body screamed in protest as he rolled out of bed. The crash of his bed frame had brought his mother running, and he'd had to invent a flimsy excuse about tripping in the dark. The lie felt slick and uncomfortable in his mouth, the first of many he would have to tell to protect his father's impossible secret. He stood before his mirror, wincing as he pulled on a shirt. His reflection showed a boy still reeling from revelation, but beneath the exhaustion, a new, hard spark was forming in his eyes. On his desk lay the open notebook, its title stark and clear, Archimedes System User Manual, Volume 1. The rules he had written late last night were not just observations. They were the constitution of his new life. Rule 1. It is nanotechnology, not a quirk. To the world, my quirk is construct. Rule 2. It requires two resources, energy and matter. Rule 3. Three core functions, scan, construct, enhance. The path was laid out before him, a terrifying, exhilarating climb. He had the blueprint. Now, he needed the tools and the training to execute it, and he knew just who to ask for help with the first, most critical resource, energy. Later that morning, he met All Might at the entrance to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The hero, in his skeletal form, looked over the mountain range of garbage, a graveyard of rusted appliances, tangled fishing nets, and forgotten furniture, with a grim expression. So this is it, Tashinori Yagi said, his voice a low rumble. The starting line. Izuku nodded, clutching the straps of his backpack. You said I needed to train my body? I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes. Tashinori's gaze softened as he looked at the boy. The raw determination radiating from him was palpable. I had a feeling you would say that, my boy. That's why I prepared a little something for you. He pulled out a sheaf of papers from his jacket, a meticulously detailed schedule. My custom American Dream Plan. It's a comprehensive workout regimen, diet plan, and sleep schedule designed to turn your body into a proper vessel for your power in just 10 months. Izuku took the papers with reverent hands. He scanned the pages, his eyes widening at the grueling list of exercises and the calorie-dense diet plan. To anyone else, it would look like a recipe for torture. To Izuku, it looked like a lifeline. He didn't tell All Might the true significance of the plan. He didn't explain that vessel for your power was a literal statement. This wasn't just about getting strong enough to be a hero. It was about increasing the very capacity of the battery that powered the Archimedes system. His HUD, which had been a bleak red 0.1% when he woke up, had slowly crept back up to 12.4% after a large breakfast. It was a stark, numerical reminder of his limitations. This entire beach will be your gym, All Might announced, gesturing to the sea of trash. Your goal is to clean all of this before the entrance exam. Izuku's jaw dropped. All of it? But this has been piling up for years. That's the idea. All Might boomed, briefly puffing up into his hero form for emphasis before deflating with a cough. It is a Herculean task, fitting for a future hero. Now, let's see you move this. He slapped a hand on a massive, defunct refrigerator whose door hung open like a broken jaw. Izuku stared at the rusted behemoth. It was impossible. But impossible was a word he was trying to erase from his vocabulary. He took a deep breath, gripped the edge of the fridge, and pulled. Nothing. He strained, his muscles screaming, his face turning red. The fridge didn't budge an inch. Okay, plan B. He remembered the pain, but also the intoxicating strength. He focused inward. Enhance. Arms and legs. Just 5%. Enhancement, 5% activated. Energy drain, 0.02% per second. The familiar, low hum coursed through his limbs. The pain was gone, replaced by a feeling of tightly coiled potential. He took another deep breath and pulled again. This time, with a groan of protesting metal, the refrigerator scraped a few inches across the sand. A triumphant grin flashed across Izuku's face, but it vanished as he felt the drain. In the 10 seconds he had strained, his energy had dropped by 0.2%. It seemed small, but he knew if he kept this up, he'd be empty in an hour. All Might watched, a curious glint in his eyes. He saw the boy's posture change, a subtle tensing, and then the impossible happened. The fridge moved. It was a small, almost negligible amount of power compared to One for All, but it was controlled, precise. This wasn't the quirk of a brawler. Good, Tashinori grunted, giving a nod of approval. But you can't rely on your quirk for everything. It should be your trump card, not your crutch. The goal here is to build your base strength. Use your power only when you absolutely have to. Izuku nodded, deactivating the enhancement. The advice was sound, even if All Might didn't understand the full context. He needed to build the engine, not just run it on fumes. Thus began the first phase of his 10 months of hell. Steel. Months 1 to 3, the foundation of pain. The days became a blur of grueling, repetitive motion. Mornings before school, evenings after, and entire weekends were spent at Dagoba Beach. He hauled tires, dragged waterlogged couches, and slowly, painstakingly, dismantled the mountains of trash. All Might was a harsh but effective coach, pushing him relentlessly. Every movement was a lesson in his own limitations. His energy meter became his most watched metric, more important than the time of day or the number of refrigerators he'd moved. At first, his capacity was pitiful. On the first day, he managed to use enhance in short, 3-second bursts a dozen times before his energy levels dipped into the red zone, forcing him to stop and recover. His body was a small, inefficient generator, but slowly, things began to change. As his muscles grew, so did his energy capacity. By the end of the first month, his HUD's maximum energy reading had gone from a baseline of 100 arbitrary units to 150. He could sustain a 5% enhancement for nearly a full minute. It was progress, earned through sweat, pain, and sheer force of will. Dagoba Beach was more than just his gym, it became his laboratory. While he worked, he was constantly using the skin function. It cost almost no energy and fed him a continuous stream of data. Scan the rusted car chassis. Composition: iron oxide, Fe2O3, 82%, low-grade steel alloy 15%, carbon trace 3%. Scan the pile of plastic bottles. Composition: polyethylene terephthalate, PET, 99%, various dyes/contaminants 1%. He was building a mental library of materials, understanding their properties, their densities, their potential uses. The beach wasn't just trash. It was a treasure trove of raw matter. He began to integrate small, efficient construct commands into his work. When he couldn't get a good grip on a slick, algae-covered piece of metal, he would think, construct, textured grip pad. A small, rough patch of material, synthesized from airborne dust and sand, would form on his glove, allowing him to get the purchase he needed. It cost a tiny fraction of his energy but saved him immense physical strain. He was learning efficiency. One evening, exhausted and covered in grime, he sat on a cleared patch of sand, staring at a massive, tangled ball of steel cables and rebar. It was too heavy to move in one piece and too dense to pull apart by hand. There has to be a smarter way, he thought, pulling up the scan data. He saw the internal stress points, the rust-weakened joints. He remembered a documentary he'd watched about industrial cutters. He held out his hand. Construct, shear. A small, two-fingered pincer. Jaws made of hardened carbon, reinforced with tungsten. Focus the material composition. Harvest from that car door over there. Energy cost, 1.8%. Matter required, 2.1 kilograms. Source, rusted steel panel 5 distance. Proceed? Y/N. Yes. He felt a familiar dizzying lurch as his energy was consumed. Across the sand, a section of the rusted car door seemed to dissolve, the red-brown flakes flowing through the air in a shimmering stream towards his hand. The stream converged, solidifying with a low hum into a wicked-looking, pincer-like tool in his grasp. It was heavy, solid. He walked over to the tangle of rebar, fitted the shear around a single rod, and squeezed. Enhance flared in his arm for a single second. With a loud snap, the rebar was severed. He did it again, and again. In 10 minutes, the impassable metal knot was a neat pile of manageable rods. All Might, observing from a distance, raised an eyebrow. The boy wasn't just getting stronger. He was getting smarter. He wasn't solving problems with brute force. he was creating the right tool for the job. Months 4 to 7, the integration of code. As his body hardened, Izuku turned his focus to the other half of the equation, his mind. His evenings were no longer for recovery, but for intense, systematic study. The local library became his second home. His computer screen was a constant cascade of university lectures, physics simulations, and coding tutorials. He started with the basics, Newtonian physics. He needed to understand force, mass, acceleration, and vectors to create constructs that were stable and effective. He learned that simply making a strong wall wasn't enough. He needed to understand load distribution and design it with internal buttresses to withstand a powerful impact. Then came materials science. This was where the Archimedes system's potential truly began to unfold. He learned about alloys, polymers, and crystalline structures. Why was a diamond harder than steel? What was the tensile strength of a carbon nanotube? The knowledge wasn't abstract. It was a list of recipes. He could now, in theory, construct materials that didn't even exist outside of a laboratory. One night, he tried a new experiment. Instead of a simple shield, he tried to create a composite. He pictured a shield composed of layers, a flexible, impact-absorbing polymer on the outside, a rigid ceramic core to distribute the force, and a final layer of cross-hatched carbon fiber to prevent shattering. The design interface on his HUD was more complex than ever before, a multi-layered blueprint he manipulated with thought alone. The energy cost was significantly higher than his first clumsy shield, but the result was astounding. He created a small buckler and tested it by throwing a heavy chunk of metal at it. The simple hexagonal shield he manifested against the sludge villain had shattered instantly. This one caught the projectile with a dull thud, the outer layer deforming slightly to absorb the kinetic energy before returning to its original shape. The most transformative field of study, however, was programming. He started with basic Python to understand logic, loops, and functions. He quickly realized that the commands he was giving the nanites were like simple lines of code. Construct, shield, was a function call. But what if he could write more complex scripts? His HUD, seemingly responding to his new knowledge, revealed a new, previously hidden feature, a scripting interface. It was a blank slate, a mental command line editor. He could write macros, predefined sequences of actions for the nanites to perform. This was the key. This was how he would overcome his human reaction time. His first macro was simple. He called it Quick Shield. It was a script that would automatically source ambient matter, calculate the trajectory of an incoming projectile based on his visual input, and manifest a small, dense shield at the optimal intercept point. All he had to do was think the command run, Quick Shield. The final piece of his intellectual puzzle was biology and first aid. If enhance could damage his body, could construct be used to fix it? He dove into anatomy, learning about bone structures, muscle groups, and the vascular system. He learned about how blood coagulates, how tissues heal. His father's message had mentioned the system's purpose was restoration and defense. He hadn't fully grasped it until now. He practiced by creating microscopic splints around his strained muscles after a day of training, or by synthesizing nutrient-rich compounds and injecting them directly into his bloodstream to speed up his recovery. The energy costs were high, but it allowed him to push his physical training further and harder than any normal human could. He was not just the operator of the machine, he was also its primary subject of maintenance. By the end of the 7th month, Izuku was a different person. The scrawny, timid boy was gone, replaced by a lean, wiry young man with defined muscles and a gaze that seemed to see the world in terms of its underlying structure. His notebooks were now filled with complex schematics, chemical formulas, and lines of elegant, efficient code. He had developed his core hero kit, the set of macros and constructs that would define his initial fighting style. Mobility, high tensile tethers, synthesized from a carbon nanotube polymer. They could be fired from his wrists, tipped with grapnels that could anchor to almost any surface. He was no all-might, capable of leaping buildings, but with these, he could be Spider-Man, swinging through the urban canyons with breathtaking speed. Defense/offense, his gauntlets and greaves. No longer simple chunks of metal, they were now complex, articulated constructs that formed over his clothes. He designed them with honeycomb interiors for maximum shock absorption with minimum weight. They allowed him to block blows and deliver powerful, reinforced strikes without relying on the dangerous enhance function for more than a split second at the point of impact. Tactics, this was his masterstroke. He called them motes. They were tiny, dragonfly-like sensory drones, no bigger than his thumbnail. Each one was a marvel of microengineering, equipped with optical, thermal, and acoustic sensors. They were synthesized from ambient carbon and silicon, making them almost impossible to detect. He could deploy a dozen at a time, creating a real-time, three-dimensional tactical map of his surroundings, streamed directly to his HUD. He was no longer just a participant in a fight. He was the command and control center. Months 8 to 10, the art of refinement. The final 3 months were dedicated to a single purpose: practice. The trash on Dagoba Beach was almost gone. The shoreline was visible for the first time in years. The cleared space became his personal training ground, his dojo. He ran drills for hours on end. He would set up targets, old cans, discarded bottles, and practice deploying his quick shield macro against projectiles he threw himself. He would practice his mobility, swinging from the rusted skeletons of abandoned cranes, learning to control his momentum, to change direction midair. He combined macros, creating fluid combat sequences, deploy motes, swing into position, form a shield on his left arm, a gauntlet on his right, and engage a target, all in a seamless flow of thought and action. He learned to manage his energy with miserly precision. Every construct was designed for maximum efficiency. He discovered he could reabsorb his constructs, reclaiming about 80% of the matter and 10% of the energy, which made his style far more sustainable. 1 week before the exam, he stood before the clean, pristine shoreline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The sea breeze felt clean. He had done it. He had moved a mountain. His body was a testament to his work. He was no muscle-bound brawler, but every inch of him was functional strength. His HUD showed his energy capacity was now at 1,200 units, a 12-fold increase from where he started. The final piece of business was bureaucratic. He had to officially register for the UA exam. He filled out the forms, his hand steady. When he reached the box labeled Quirk, he paused for only a second before writing the name he had chosen 10 months ago. Construct. It was simple, descriptive, and revealed nothing of the impossible truth humming in his veins. It was the perfect disguise. The morning of the UA entrance exam arrived, crisp and clear. Izuku stood in his bedroom, adjusting the tie of his school uniform. He looked at his reflection. The boy staring back was someone he barely recognized, but for the first time, it was someone he was proud of. His eyes were calm, his posture confident. The faint, familiar blue glow of his HUD was a comforting presence. Archimedes System V. 7.2. User, Izuku Midoriya. Status optimal. Energy reserves, 100%. Macros loaded. Quick shield. Tether _V 3.4. Gauntlet _impact. Mote _swarm _alpha. He picked up the locket from his nightstand. It was cool and smooth against his skin as he fastened it around his neck and tucked it under his shirt. It was his father's legacy, a burden that had become his greatest strength. He gave his room a final glance, the posters of All Might, the notebooks filled with his journey, and smiled. His dream had not changed, but he had. He was no longer a fanboy hoping for a miracle. He was an engineer, an analyst, and a fighter, armed with a power limited only by the laws of physics and his own imagination. He wasn't walking into the UA exam to see if he could be a hero. He was going to prove that he already was one. With a final, deep breath, Izuku Midoriya walked out the door, leaving the boy who was once called Deku far behind, ready to build his own future, one atom at a time. The air in the UA High Auditorium crackled with a potent mixture of adolescent anxiety and unrestrained ambition. Izuku sat amongst hundreds of other examinees, a single, determined face in a sea of nervous energy. He could feel the thrum of quirks all around him, a low-level hum of power, a boy down the row whose fingers were idly drumming out sparks, a girl behind him whose hair seemed to float with a faint psychic energy. For the first time in his life, being surrounded by such power didn't make him feel small or inadequate. It felt like a data set. His HUD was a quiet, steady presence in his vision, his skin function running on a low-power, passive setting. It couldn't analyze quirks, not directly, as they were a biological phenomenon beyond the system's current understanding. But it could read the physical and energetic signatures they produced. The sparking boy was emitting localized bursts of thermal and electromagnetic energy. The floating hair was accompanied by a fluctuating gravitational field. It was fascinating. He was already gathering threat intelligence. On stage, the pro-hero present Mike was screaming into his microphone, his voice a sonic assault that made the speakers buzz. "Welcome to today's live performance, everybody. Can I get a yeah?" A dead, awkward silence filled the hall. Izuku scribbled a note in the small, pocket-sized notebook he'd brought. Present Mike, Quirk voice. Sonic-based. High decibel output. Potential for concussive force and disorientation. Countermeasures, acoustic dampening constructs, resonant frequency cancellation? Feasible? Present Mike, undeterred by the lack of audience participation, launched into an explanation of the practical exam. It would be a 10-minute mock urban battle. Examinees would be split into different battle centers and would face off against 4 types of robotic villains, each worth a different point value, 1, 2, or 3 points. Your goal, little listeners, is to use your quirks to rack up a heroic score by immobilizing these villains. As the explanation continued, a tall, well-built boy with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his arm chopping the air with rigid precision. "Excuse me, sir. I have a question." "Hit me." On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed. If this is a misprint, it is a gross error on the part of Japan's most prestigious hero academy. He then turned, his arms swiveling like a turret to point directly at Izuku. "And you, with the messy hair. You have been muttering and scribbling this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave." A wave of stares washed over Izuku. The old, familiar sting of shame pricked at him, a ghost of his former self. But it was just a ghost. He took a breath, looked the serious boy in the eye, and gave a small, apologetic bow of his head. He didn't say anything, just closed his notebook and tucked it away. He had all the data he needed for now. Present Mike chuckled. All right, examinee 7111. An excellent question. The 4th villain type is the 0-pointer. It's worth 0 points. Think of it as a gimmick, an obstacle to avoid. I recommend you run from it." The serious boy, seemingly satisfied, sat back down with a crisp "Thank you, sir." Izuku, meanwhile, processed the new information. 0-pointer. No points. A gimmick. Unlikely. UA wouldn't waste resources on a simple obstacle. It's a test. A test of what? Evasion? Decision-making under pressure? Or something else entirely? He filed the anomaly away for later. Soon, they were bussed to their assigned battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before the towering gates of Battle Center B. The cityscape behind the gates was a sprawling, realistic replica of a dense urban environment, complete with skyscrapers, narrow alleys, and wide-open streets. It was a perfect tactical playground. He began his pre-combat ritual. He took a slow, deep breath, calming his racing heart. System check, he thought. Archimedes system, optimal. Energy reserves, 100%. Ambient matter density, high. Concrete dust, atmospheric metals, high carbon content. He was topped up and had plenty of building materials. He ran a quick diagnostic on his primary macros, checking the mental pathways. Everything was green. He looked around at the other examinees. They were stretching, posturing, showing off their quirks. A boy with engine-like calves was revving them loudly. A girl with pink skin was exuding a bubbly confidence. A blonde boy with a strange belt that shot a sparkling laser was striking a pose. They all looked strong, flashy, powerful. They were planning to smash. Izuku had a different approach. He wasn't here to smash. He was here to solve a problem. The problem was accumulating the maximum number of points in 10 minutes. The most efficient solution was not necessarily the most destructive one. And start. Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers, so loud it was a physical force. The other examinees stood frozen for a beat, confused. What's wrong? The test started. Run! Run! There's no countdown in a real fight. That snapped them out of it. The massive gates slid open, and the crowd surged forward, a chaotic stampede of quirks and adrenaline. Izuku was nearly knocked over, but he held his ground. He didn't join the mad dash. Instead, he took 2 seconds to execute his first command. Run, mot_swarm_alpha. Energy cost, 2%. From the back of his neck, a near-invisible cloud of grayish dust puffed out, instantly dispersing in the air. 12 dragonfly-sized motes, synthesized from ambient carbon, shot into the air. They were silent, practically invisible against the concrete and steel of the city. Instantly, his HUD blossomed with information. 12 new mini-maps appeared in the periphery of his vision, each one a live feed from a mote. The world transformed from a first-person view into a tactical command center. He saw the layout of the first few city blocks, the locations of the other examinees as they scattered, and most importantly, the positions of the robots. Red icons, labeled 1P, 2P, and 3P, began to populate his map. He saw what the others didn't. They were all charging down the main boulevard, where the first few one-pointers were emerging. It was going to be a chaotic dogpile, everyone fighting over the easiest targets. Inefficient. His motes, however, revealed a cluster of 2-pointers and a 3-pointer down a narrow side alley, currently completely uncontested. While the pack fought for scraps, he would go for the prime cuts. He broke into a controlled sprint, his body conditioned by 10 months of grueling work. He was fast, much faster than he used to be. As he ran, he executed his next command. Construct, mobility_tethers. Left and right wrists. Energy cost, 0.5%. Thin, gray lines, no thicker than fishing wire but with the tensile strength of spun carbon nanotubes, shot from emitters that formed seamlessly on his wrists. The grapnels at the end were shaped like tiny, 3-fingered claws. He fired his left tether. It soared through the air, the claw anchoring itself to the corner of a 3rd-story building with a barely audible thwip. He leaped, and the tether pulled him skyward, swinging him in a graceful arc over the heads of the brawling crowd below. He was airborne, a silent, efficient shadow moving above the chaos. This was his element. Whoa, what's that guy's quirk? Someone in the street below shouted, pointing up. Izuku didn't have time to register their surprise. He was already approaching his destination. He landed silently on a rooftop overlooking the alley his motes had scouted. Below him were his targets. 2 squat, tank-like 2-pointers and a single, towering 3-pointer that looked like a bipedal scorpion, its tail ending in a menacing cannon. They were activating, their optical sensors glowing red. He had the element of surprise. Time to dismantle. Analyze targets, he commanded. The skin function washed over the robots. Data flooded his HUD. Target, 2P villain bot. Armor, hardened steel plating, 5 centimeters. Propulsion, treads powered by internal electric motor. Weakness identified, exposed hydraulic lines at axle joints. Unshielded main capacitor on rear panel. Target, 3P villain bot. Armor, titanium carbide alloy, 8 centimeters. Weaponry, plasma cannon, tail-mounted. Weakness identified, cannon requires 3.5 second charge cycle. Exposed heat vents along spine during charge. Critical power conduit runs along ventral side, underside. Perfect. He had his plan. He started with the 2-pointers. Leaping from the roof, he used a short burst from a tether to swing down behind the first one. It hadn't even registered his presence yet. Construct, tungsten rods. Index and middle fingers. High density, armor piercing. Energy cost, 0.4%. 2 needle-thin, incredibly dense gray rods, about 6 inches long, materialized in his right hand, held between his fingers like darts. He didn't need a huge explosion or a mighty punch, he just needed precision. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled the rods. They flew with unerring accuracy, striking the 2-pointers' axle joints. There was a sharp peeting sound as the rods punctured the weaker metal of the hydraulic housings. Pressurized fluid sprayed out with a hiss. The robot's right tread seized up instantly, causing it to lurch and grind to a halt, immobilized. Villain points 2. The second 2-pointer swiveled, its red eye fixing on him. It charged, its heavy treads chewing up the asphalt. Izuku didn't back away. He ran towards it. Run, macro, quick shield, he thought, just as the robot swung a massive pincer arm. Energy cost, 0.8%. A hexagonal, blue-tinged shield, about the size of a manhole cover, shimmered into existence a foot in front of him. The pincer slammed into it with a deafening clang. The shield buckled, cracked spiderwebbing across its surface, but it held. The force was dissipated, throwing Izuku back a few feet, but leaving him unharmed. As the shield dissolved into light, Izuku was already in motion. He slid under the robot's clumsy counterswing, his hand slapping against its rear panel. Construct, EMP_burst. Short range, localized. Energy cost, 1.5%. A small, metallic node formed on his glove. It pulsed once with a brilliant blue light and a sharp ZZZZZT sound. The two-pointer's optical sensor flickered and died. Its motor whined down into silence. The unshielded capacitor, its weakness, had been its downfall. Villain points 4. 2 robots down in less than 30 seconds. He was already feeling the energy drain, his reserves down to 94.8%. This was a marathon, not a sprint. He needed to stay efficient. Now for the main event. The three-pointer. It had finally locked onto him, its scorpion-like tail rising, the cannon at the tip beginning to glow with a menacing orange light. Plasma cannon. 3.5-second charge cycle. Heat vents exposed. His skin data was his lifeline. Izuku broke into a sprint, not away from the robot, but circling it. The robot's torso was surprisingly slow to turn. As it tracked him, the cannon's glow intensified. He could see the heat vents along its spine shimmer open, venting superheated air. 2 seconds. He fired a tether at the wall above the robot. Construct, cryo_pellets. 5. Spherical. Liquid nitrogen core, brittle shell. A niche construct he'd designed after studying thermodynamics. Not truly cold, but a chemical composition that induced a rapid endothermic reaction on impact, causing extreme thermal shock. Energy cost, 2.2%. 5 small, frosty-looking pellets formed in his free hand as he swung. 3 seconds. At the apex of his swing, as the cannon was about to fire, he flung the pellets. They sailed through the air and landed perfectly in the open, glowing heat vents. 3.5 seconds. The cannon fired, unleashing a sizzling bolt of plasma that blasted a molten crater where Izuku had been a moment before. But the robot didn't have time for a follow-up shot. The cryo_pellets shattered inside its vents, the endothermic reaction flash freezing the delicate internal components. Metal, superheated one moment and subjected to extreme cold the next, contracted violently. With a series of sharp, cracking sounds, the robot's torso seized. Critical systems failed. Its red eye flickered and died. Villain points 7. He landed lightly, his breathing controlled. While the main group was likely still squabbling over their first couple of points, he had calmly and cleanly dispatched 3 high-value targets. He checked his mode feeds. More robots were converging on the sound of the plasma blast. He was already moving, melting into the shadows of the alleyways, guided by his tactical overview. For the next 8 minutes, Izuku was a ghost. He never engaged in a head-on brawl. He was a whirlwind of calculated, efficient chaos. He used tethers to trip up charging one-pointers, sending them crashing into walls. He didn't even need to destroy them. Immobilization was the goal. He fired conductive wires to short-circuit exposed power panels. He used focused sonic bursts, too high-pitched for the human ear to register, to shatter the delicate optical sensors of sniper bots perched on rooftops. He encountered other examinees, of course. He saw the serious boy with glasses from the auditorium, his engine legs allowing him to move with incredible speed, delivering devastating kicks. Izuku tagged his location on his HUD. Engine Quirk. High mobility, high melee damage. Name, Ida Tenya. He saw the pink-skinned girl, who could apparently secrete acid from her hands, melting the armor plating of a two-pointer. Acid Quirk. Corrosive. Effective against armor. And he saw Bakugo. Kaken was not a ghost. He was a natural disaster. He tore through the main street like a hurricane of explosions and rage, screaming challenges at the unfeeling machines. Die! 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 He roared, blasting a three-pointer to smithereens with a massive explosion that shattered windows for a block. It was brutally effective, awe-inspiring in its raw power, but Izuku, watching from a mote's eye view, also saw the inefficiency. Bakugo was spending huge amounts of energy for overkill, and the collateral damage was immense. Heroic, but not optimal. High point score, but likely low on other metrics. Izuku stuck to his own style. He became a battlefield janitor, cleaning up the robots the flashier examinees missed. He disabled a two-pointer that was about to ambush the laser belt kid. He toppled a one-pointer that was sneaking up on a girl with purple hair and strange earphone jacks. He didn't stop to talk. He just neutralized the threat and moved on, his HUD tally climbing steadily. 28 points. 31 points. 36 points. He was in the zone, his mind and the Archimedes system working in perfect harmony. The city was his chessboard, and he was moving all the pieces. With about 2 minutes left on the clock, a deep, earth-shaking rumble brought his fluid movements to a halt. The ground trembled. Buildings shook, dust and pebbles raining down from their facades. Down the main boulevard, a shadow fell over everything. The zero-pointer. President Mike had not been exaggerating its size. It was a mechanical titan, a Goliath of green metal and black wiring that towered over the tallest buildings in the mock city. Its single, massive red eye scanned the battlefield, and its colossal arms could level a building with a single swipe. The effect on the other examinees was instantaneous. Panic. It's the zero-pointer. Run! It's not worth any points. It's huge. We can't fight that thing. A wave of students, Bakugo and Ida included, turned and fled. It was the logical choice. A pointless, unbeatable obstacle. Izuku began to back away as well, his motes tracking the robot's slow, ponderous movements. It was a gimmick, as President Mike said. Engaging it would be a foolish waste of time and energy. Then he heard a cry. Oof! Help! His head snapped toward the sound. There, amidst a pile of rubble shaken loose by the zero-pointer's appearance, was a girl with a round, friendly face and brown hair, trapped. Her leg was pinned under a huge slab of concrete. It was the same girl he had seen at the UA entrance gate earlier, the one who had stopped him from tripping. And she was directly in the zero-pointer's path. The giant robot took another thunderous step, its massive foot descending directly towards her. There was no time for a complex plan. No time for a clever takedown. The other heroes in training were running away. The proctors, who he knew must be watching, hadn't intervened yet. She was going to be crushed. All Might's voice echoed in his memory from the day of the sludge villain. My legs just started moving. His did too. He sprinted from the alley, breaking cover and charging directly at the impossible titan. His mind, a finely tuned analytical engine, went into overdrive. Can't destroy it. Armor is too thick. Skin reveals no obvious external weaknesses. Too big for an EMP. Objective, not destruction. Objective, rescue. How do you stop a moving mountain? You don't. You brace for its impact. He ran towards a half-demolished office building directly beside the trapped girl. His motes swarmed it, his skin function drinking in every detail of its internal structure in a fraction of a second. He saw load-bearing pillars, rebar skeletons, and critical stress fractures. The building was already unstable. The zero-pointer's next step would bring it down right on top of the girl. He only had seconds. This would take everything he had left. System override. Divert all non-essential functions to construct. Maximum matter conversion. Source. All available scrap metal, rebar from surrounding rubble, and the building's own superstructure. His HUD flashed with crimson warnings. Warning, massive energy expenditure imminent. Estimated cost, 75% of total reserves. Biometric stress will exceed safe parameters. Do it! He slammed both hands against the side of the crumbling building. The world seemed to explode in a silent storm of blue-gray light. The Archimedes system, unleashed in a way he had never attempted before, went to work. The concrete and steel around his hands seemed to turn to liquid. Rebar twisted and flowed like water. Scrap metal from dozens of destroyed robots flew through the air, drawn to him like iron filings to a magnet. It was not a shield. It was not a weapon. It was an act of massive, desperate, instantaneous civil engineering. He wasn't building a wall to stop the robot. He was reinforcing the building to withstand it. A massive, intricate, honeycomb-patterned support structure erupted from the side of the building. It was a complex web of newly forged buttresses, support beams, and tension cables, all created in a matter of seconds. It anchored the failing structure, redirecting the kinetic force of the zero-pointer's next footstep down into the building's foundation and away from the girl. The zero-pointer's foot came down. The ground shook with the force of a tectonic event. The reinforced building groaned, a deep, resonant sound of stressed metal and concrete. Cracks spiderwebbed across the street. But it held. The support structure, glowing with residual energy, did its job. The collapse was averted. The energy drain was catastrophic. Izuku felt as if his soul was being sucked out of his body. His vision went white, his ears rang. Energy reserves, 3.2%. He stumbled, his knees giving way. But he wasn't done. The girl was still trapped. With the last dregs of his strength, he focused on the concrete slab pinning her. Scan. Find the fracture lines. He saw them, a web of hairline cracks. Construct resonant actuators. Small, high frequency. Energy cost, 2.5%. Warning, energy reserves critical. Tiny, metallic discs materialized on the surface of the slab. They began to vibrate, emitting an imperceptible, high-frequency hum. The vibrations traveled through the concrete, exploiting the microfractures. In a second, the massive slab didn't explode. It simply crumbled into manageable, harmless chunks of gravel. Villain points, 36. His energy meter blinked a final, desperate warning. 0.7%. The world went black. He was falling. As his consciousness faded, he felt a strange, light sensation. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him completely was the girl he had just saved, her hands slapping his chest, and the ground rushing up to meet him, only for his fall to suddenly slow to a gentle drift. A loud buzzer echoed across the city. Time's up. In a darkened observation room, a group of pro-heroes sat watching a bank of monitors. Did you see that? A teacher exclaimed, pointing at the screen focused on Battle Center B. The kid with the messy green hair. He didn't even try to fight the zero-pointer. Aizawa Shota, his tired eyes betraying none of his inner thoughts, took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't need to. He identified the true threat, the collateral damage. And he addressed it. Nizu, the principal of UA, sat in his high chair, his paws clasped together, a wide grin on his rodent face. Oh, he did much more than that. He performed a complete structural analysis and reinforcement of a failing building in under 5 seconds. He then used a precisely calibrated resonant frequency to neutralize the immediate hazard to the other examinee, all without causing further harm. It was not an act of power. It was an act of genius, an act of pure, unadulterated heroism. On the screen, the scoreboard for Battle Center B was being displayed. 1. Katsuki Bakugo 77 villain points. 2. Tenya Ida 52 villain points. 7. Izuku Midoriya 36 villain points. Aizawa grunted. His villain point score is decent, but not spectacular. But we are not just looking for villain points, are we? Nizu said, his eyes twinkling as he pressed a button on his console. A new column appeared on the scoreboard, labeled Rescue Points. The numbers began to fill in. Most students had 0. A few had single digits for helping another student out of a tight spot. Then the tally for Izuku Midoriya appeared. The number ticked up with dizzying speed. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. It finally stopped. Izuku Midoriya rescue points, 60. The room was silent. A score that high was unprecedented in the history of the exam. He had not only saved the girl from the zero-pointer, but his motes had recorded every single instance where his subtle interventions, tripping a robot here, disabling one there, had saved another examinee from a potential ambush. He had been playing a completely different game than everyone else. Aizawa allowed a small, rare smile to touch his lips. He had been intrigued by the boy's technical, non-physical quirk application during the demonstration. But this was something else entirely. Raw power was common. Tactical brilliance paired with selfless instinct. That was the mark of a true hero. Well then, Nizu chirped, hopping down from his chair. I think we have a very interesting new student this year. The letter from Yue arrived a week after the exam. It was a thick, formal envelope that felt impossibly heavy in Izuku's trembling hands. He had spent the entire week in a state of suspended animation, replaying the exam in his head, agonizing over his performance. He knew his villain point score of 36 was respectable, but was it enough? He remembered the sea of powerful, flashy quirks. He remembered collapsing from energy depletion, a failure in resource management. He had shown what he could do, but he had also shown his limits. He retreated to his room, the locket cool against his sternum, a silent source of strength. His mother waited nervously on the other side of the door. With a deep breath, he opened the envelope. A small, metallic disc clattered onto his desk and sputtered to life, projecting a hologram. But it wasn't Principal Nizu or another teacher. It was All Might, in his full, heroic glory. I am here! As a projection. The hero boomed. Izuku nearly fell out of his chair. All Might went on to explain that he would be a teacher at UA, a piece of news that sent a jolt of pure joy through Izuku. Then, he got to the point. He played back footage from the exam, footage from one of Izuku's own motes, that UA's systems had apparently captured. It showed Izuku's fluid, efficient takedowns, his tactical use of the environment, his silent interventions that saved other examinees from ambushes. You displayed intelligence, creativity, and incredible resourcefulness, young Midoriya, All Might said, his smile beaming. Your villain point score was a solid 36, more than enough to pass on its own. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He'd passed. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. But that's not the whole story, All Might continued, the screen behind him changing to show the dramatic footage of the zero-pointer. In a practical exam like this, we're not just looking for destructive power. A hero's job is to save people. And that's why we have another, secret scoring system. The words rescue points flashed on the screen in golden letters. Izuku Midoriya, for your selfless, decisive actions in saving another examinee at great personal risk, you have been awarded 60 rescue points. For a total score of 96, All Might pointed dramatically out of the projection. Young Midoriya, you have passed. Welcome. This is your hero academia. Izuku burst into tears, a flood of cathartic joy and relief. It was real. Everything, the 10 months of brutal training, the sleepless nights of study, the pain, the exhaustion, it had all been worth it. He hadn't just scraped by. He had earned his place through the very principles he had set for himself: intelligence, efficiency, and heroism. He opened the door to his teary-eyed mother, and gave her the news. Her joy was a mirror of his own, pure and absolute. For the first time, her tears were not of sorrow or apology, but of overwhelming pride. The first day at UA High felt like stepping into a dream. The building was immense, a modern marvel of glass and steel. Just walking through the gates was a validation of his entire life's ambition. He found his classroom, 1A, the door comically oversized. He took a breath and slid it open. The scene inside was already chaotic. The serious boy with glasses from the exam, Tenya Ida, was rigidly chastising a familiar, angry blonde for having his feet on the desk. Don't you think that is disrespectful to the upperclassmen and the craftsmen who made these desks? Ida lectured, his hands chopping the air. Like I care, you four-eyed extra. Katsuki Bakugo snarled back, a contemptuous smirk on his face. What middle school are you from anyway? Izuku felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Kaken. Of course he was here. He was always the center of any room he was in. Izuku tried to slip in unnoticed, but Ida's sharp eyes spotted him immediately. It's you! Ida marched over, his movements stiff and formal. Good morning. I am Tenya Ida from Somei Private Academy. I'm Midoriya, Izuku stammered, caught off guard. Nice to meet you, Midoriya-kun, Ida said, his expression grave. I must apologize. I misjudged you at the entrance exam. I was so focused on the obvious threat of the villains that I completely failed to grasp the true nature of the test. You understood it perfectly. I was humbled by your insight. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice piped up from behind him. Oh! It's you! The plain-looking one. He turned to see the friendly-faced girl he had saved from the zero-pointer. She was beaming at him. You were so cool! That massive thing you did with the building, and then making the rock go poof. My name's Achiko Uraraka. Thanks for saving me back there. Her genuine, bubbly energy was infectious. It was nothing, Izuku mumbled, his face flushing. I'm just glad you weren't hurt. It was at that moment that Bakugo finally looked up from his confrontation with Ida. His crimson eyes widened, first in surprise, then in a dawning, furious disbelief. His gaze locked onto Izuku, and the entire atmosphere in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Deku? He rasped, the name a venomous curse. The friendly chatter around Izuku died. Everyone turned to look. Bakugo slowly took his feet off the desk and stood up, his posture radiating pure menace. What the hell are you doing here? He growled, his voice low and dangerous. Izuku flinched but held his ground. I passed the exam, Kaken. Like everyone else. Passed? Bakugo took a step forward, his palms starting to emit a faint, crackling smoke. How? You're a quirkless, useless wannabe. You can't just pass the UA exam. What trick did you pull? Who did you cheat? The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. Before Izuku could formulate a response, a new voice cut through the tension, lazy and monotone. If you're here to make friends, you should pack up and leave. Everyone turned to the source. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week was lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a tired, grumpy caterpillar. He unzipped the bag, stood up, and took a sip from a juice pouch. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not rational. His tired, bloodshot eyes scanned the room. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Now, put these on and meet me on the athletic field. He tossed the UA gym uniform onto his desk. The abrupt, bizarre introduction successfully broke the tension. As the students filed out to the locker rooms, Izuku could feel Bakugo's murderous glare burning into the back of his head. This confrontation was far from over. Out on the field, Aizawa regarded his class of 20 students with a look of profound boredom. Today, he began, his voice flat, we're going to be conducting a quirk apprehension test. A wave of murmurs went through the class. A quirk test? Uraraka said. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? There's no time to waste on pointless pleasantries if you want to become heroes, Aizawa said dismissively. You've all been doing these kinds of physical assessments since middle school, the 50-meter dash, the standing long jump, and so on. The difference is, here at UA, you're allowed to use your quirks. He tossed the softball to Bakugo. Bakugo. You finished first in the practical exam. What was your best softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed, pointing to a large white circle on the ground. Bakugo stepped into the circle, a vicious grin spreading across his face. He wound up, and as he threw the ball, he unleashed a massive explosion from his palm. Die! He screamed, the word echoing across the field. The ball became a screaming comet, soaring high into the air and disappearing into the distance. Aizawa held up a small device, which beeped. He showed the class the screen. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in exclamations of woe. And awesome! This looks so fun! The pink-skinned girl, Mina Ashido, cheered. Aizawa's expression soured. Fun? He said, his voice dropping. A chilling aura seemed to emanate from him. You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Unbelievable. He scanned their faces, his gaze lingering on each one. All right. New rule. The student who ranks last in total points across these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled. Immediately. Panic. The fun atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, choking dread. Uraraka and a few others protested that it was unfair, but Aizawa was unmoved. Welcome to UA, he said with a grim smile. This is plus ultra. Izuku's mind, however, wasn't panicking. It was calculating. This wasn't a simple test of power. Aizawa was a pro-hero famous for his underground, logic-based approach. This was a psychological test. He wanted to see how they performed under extreme pressure. More importantly, he wanted data. He wanted to see the creative, rational, and unexpected ways they could apply their powers. Apprehension, Izuku thought. The word doesn't just mean test, it means understanding. He wants to understand our quirks. This was a test he was uniquely suited for. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Izuku was paired against Ida. As they took their positions, Ida's calves burst to life with orange flames from his engine exhausts. Aizawa's starting pistol fired. Ida was a blur, finishing in 3.04 seconds. Izuku, however, wasn't far behind. Just before the start, he had executed a quick, low-cost command. Construct, running greaves. Lightweight polymer, shock-absorbing soles, textured for maximum grip. Energy cost, 0.6%. He didn't use enhance. That was too costly for a simple sprint. Instead, he optimized his equipment. The specially designed soles gripped the track perfectly, ensuring no energy was lost to slippage. His form, honed by 10 months of relentless training, was flawless. He crossed the line in 5.58 seconds. It wasn't superhuman, but it was far better than his middle school record and a respectable score. Test 2, grip strength. This was a purely physical test where his quirk offered little direct advantage. He couldn't create a machine to squeeze the device for him. He could use enhance on his hand, but Aizawa was watching him closely. The teacher's quirk was erasure. He could nullify other quirks just by looking at them. If Izuku's quirk was a tool he created, would erasure even work on it? He didn't know, and this wasn't the time to find out. A sudden, inexplicable spike in strength would be suspicious. He squeezed the device with his own natural, hard-earned strength. The result, 58 kilograms, was average, but again, a massive improvement from his old self. Test 3, standing long jump. Most students used their quirks to launch themselves across the sandpit. Bakugo used explosions, Uraraka made herself weightless, and a frog-like girl named Tsuyu Ajui simply jumped an incredible distance. Izuku stood at the edge of the pit. He could use tethers, but that felt too overt. He needed something subtler. He focused. Construct, kinetic coils. Integrated into the soles of the greaves. Store and release kinetic energy. Energy cost, 1.2%. It was a complex micro-construction. As he crouched down, the coils in his soles compressed, storing the potential energy. Then, as he leaped, they released it in a single, powerful burst, pushing him forward. It wasn't an explosion, just a perfectly efficient transfer of energy. He sailed across the entire pit, landing cleanly on the other side. Aizawa watched, his expression unreadable, but Izuku saw him make a note on his device. Test 4, repeated side steps. Again, a test of pure agility. Izuku relied on his training and the enhanced grip of his constructed greaves. A solid, if unremarkable, score. He was consistently placing in the middle of the pack. He wasn't trying to be number one in every event. He was trying to be efficient, to prove he could use his head to solve problems without relying on overwhelming power. And then came the final, most anticipated test. Test 5, the ball throw. One by one, the students stepped up. Uraraka, touching the ball to make it weightless, scored infinity. It was a clever, lateral thinking application of her quirk. Now, it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane in his hand. Everyone was watching. He could feel Bakugo's glare like a physical heat on his skin. He knew what they expected. Some kind of superpowered throw, a burst of energy like the shield from the exam. That wasn't his style. That wasn't rational. He held the ball, running a quick scan. Object softball. Mass, 198.4 grams. Composition, cork/rubber core, yarn winding, leather cover. He began running calculations in his head, his HUD flickering with trajectory simulations. What was the optimal launch angle? The optimal velocity? A simple reinforced punch was inefficient. He needed a force multiplier. He took his stance, his left foot forward. He raised his right arm, not to throw, but palm open. Let's show him something new. Construct, centrifugal accelerator. Arm mounted. Rail guided. Electromagnetic propulsion. This was one of his most complex designs, something he theorized but never built at this scale. Energy cost, 8.5%. Matter source, ambient air, trace metals from soil. The air around his right arm shimmered. Dust and dirt from the ground swirled upwards in a vortex. With a low, humming sound that grew rapidly in pitch, a complex mechanical device materialized over his forearm. It wasn't a clunky gauntlet. It was a sleek, semi-transparent marvel of engineering. A curved rail, glowing with faint blue light, wrapped around his arm, leading to a small, U-shaped cradle where he now placed the ball. The class stared, their jaws agape. This wasn't a biological enhancement. It looked like a piece of advanced support gear had just grown out of his arm. "What is that thing?" someone whispered. Izuku ignored them. He focused, channeling a stream of energy into the device. The humming intensified. The blue light on the rail pulsed, a wave of electromagnetic force racing along its length. Fire! With a sound like a miniature railgun firing, a sharp, whip-crack thwump, the cradle shot forward along the rail, launching the softball. There was no explosion, no shockwave. Just a clean, brutally efficient release of kinetic energy. The ball was a white blur against the blue sky, spinning so fast it seemed to trail a vortex of air behind it. It soared, an almost perfectly straight line, far beyond where Bakugo's had landed before finally arcing back down to earth. Izuku's arm felt drained, a deep ache from the sheer force of the launch. The construct on his arm, its purpose served, dissolved back into a cloud of harmless dust. Aizawa held up his device. The class held its breath. 705.3 meters. A collective gasp. He had beaten Bakugo. By 1/10 of a meter. He had done it not with raw, explosive power, but with superior engineering and physics. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. DKU. The roar was primal. Bakugo launched himself forward, his face a mask of incandescent rage, explosions already erupting from his hands. What the hell was that? You've been lying to me. All this time. Before he could reach Izuku, a set of gray, tough-as steel bindings shot out and wrapped around Bakugo, immobilizing him completely. Stand down, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously low. His eyes were glowing red, his black hair floating around his head as if underwater. His capture weapon was taut. Don't make me use my quirk on you so much I get dry eye. Bakugo struggled against the bindings, thrashing like a caged animal. Let me go, Aizawa-sensei. He's been mocking me. For years, he pretended to be a weak, quirkless nobody, but he had a power like this the whole time. He was laughing at me. The accusation, born from a place of deep-seated pride and a twisted sort of betrayal, finally gave voice to the confusion that had been festering in Bakugo for weeks. He couldn't comprehend a world where Deku, the useless pebble he had defined himself against, was suddenly powerful. His entire worldview was predicated on Izuku being beneath him. For that to be a lie was a personal insult of the highest order. Aizawa looked at Izuku, his red gaze unwavering. Midoriya. Explain your quirk. Now, Izuku's heart pounded. This was the moment. The first real test of his cover story. He had to be calm, logical, and give away nothing. He looked at Aizawa, then at the struggling, furious Bakugo. My quirk is called Construct, he said, his voice steady, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. I can convert ambient matter into solid objects based on mental blueprints. The complexity and strength of the constructs are limited by my energy, and my understanding of what I'm trying to build. He gestured to where the launcher had been. That wasn't my body. It was a tool I created. I didn't beat Bakugo's throw with my physical strength. I beat it with a better understanding of physics. My quirk isn't a power-up, it's a workshop. The explanation was clean, concise, and technically true, without revealing the nanite-based origin. It perfectly framed his abilities as a skill-based, intelligence-driven power. Aizawa's glowing eyes narrowed. He was using erasure on Izuku, but nothing was happening. Izuku felt no change, no loss of power. Of course not. Erasure worked by shutting down the expression of a person's quirk factor. Izuku didn't have one. His nanites were a separate, technological system bonded to him. As far as Aizawa's quirk was concerned, there was nothing to erase. The constructs, once created, were just objects. They were no more a part of Izuku's biology than the clothes he was wearing. This fact did not go unnoticed by Aizawa. His quirk isn't being erased, the teacher thought, a flicker of deep intrigue crossing his features. Is it a mutation type that creates a permanent organ for construction? No, the constructs dissolve. It's an emitter type. So why isn't it shutting down? Is it a fire and forget ability? Does he create the object, and then it exists independently of his quirk? It was an anomaly, a puzzle. And Shota Aizawa loved puzzles. He finally deactivated his quirk, his hair falling back around his face. I see, he said, his tone giving nothing away. He released Bakugo from his capture weapon. That's enough. Get back in line, Bakugo. Control your temper, or you'll be the one facing expulsion. Bakugo stumbled forward, breathing heavily, his eyes still locked on Izuku. The rage was still there, but now it was mixed with a toxic, simmering confusion. Deku's explanation only made it worse. It wasn't that Deku was secretly strong, it was that he was smart. He had been outthought, outmaneuvered. For Bakugo, a prodigy who had always relied on his overwhelming power, it was a completely alien and infuriating concept. You're not even fighting with your own body. Bakugo spat, his voice a low hiss. It wasn't a question. It was the ultimate expression of his contempt. To him, true strength came from within, a biological gift honed into a weapon. Izuku was using tricks, tools, cheating. Izuku met his gaze, and for the first time, there was no fear in his eyes. Only a quiet, unshakable resolve. No, Kaken, he said, his voice calm. I'm fighting with my mind. The rest of the tests passed in a tense silence. The final scores were posted. Izuku Midoriya placed a respectable 9th out of 20. He hadn't excelled in every category, but his strategic, high-scoring results in the long jump and ball throw had balanced out his average physical scores. At the bottom of the list, in 20th place, was a short, purple-haired boy named Minoru Mineta. He burst into tears, convinced he was about to be expelled. Aizawa waited for the histrionics to die down before sighing. By the way, the whole expulsion thing was a lie. The class stared in stunned silence, which quickly turned into an uproar of outrage. It was a rational deception, Aizawa said, a wicked grin on his face. Designed to make you push yourselves beyond your limits, to show me your true potential. As the class began to process the deception, Aizawa's gaze fell on Izuku. He had seen the boy's potential. It was vast, strange, and completely unlike any quirk he had ever encountered. It wasn't the explosive potential of Bakugo, or the raw power of a Todoroki. It was the quiet, terrifying potential of a grandmaster playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. This boy would be a fascinating, if problematic, student to teach. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day. As they walked back to the classroom, Uraraka and Ida flanked Izuku, chattering about the tests. But Izuku was acutely aware of Bakugo walking several paces behind them, silent, his fists clenched, his crimson eyes never leaving the back of Izuku's head. The rivalry had been reset. It was no longer a bully and his victim. It was a force of nature versus an immovable intellect. And the first battle had just been fought, not with fists, but with philosophy. The storm was just beginning.